Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to the Roots Tech 2024 MC, Kirby Hayborn.
Hello! Welcome, everybody. This is the Impact Forum at Roots Tech 2024. I'm Kirby Hayborn, your MC. Thank you for being here today. Today, we're exploring the profound impact family discovery has on each of us, hence the name Impact Forum. Family history isn't just about records and family trees, it's about the positive impact of knowing your family story. This impact extends far beyond ourselves, creating ripple effects that touch the lives of others in ways we may not even realize. And there's no one better to shed light on this than our first featured speakers. Now, kicking things off, we have Robyn Fivush, a distinguished researcher from Emory University. She has over 150 publications to her name. Dr. Fivush is a pioneer and a leading voice in her field. She's here to share her expertise on family stories and how they influence who we become. And joining her on stage will be Dr. Jody Kellis. She's a fellow professor and researcher from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And her work builds upon the foundational research of Dr. Fivush. So, without further ado, let's give a warm welcome to Drs. Robyn Fivush and Jody Kellis.
Hello, I'm Jody.
And I'm Robyn.
I have to tell you that it's very rare for a professor to get an audience or in a room this big or wear Britney Spears mics. But since we've always wanted to have our own talk show, we're going to lean into it and sit down and interview each other about a research on family storytelling and hope that it's meaningful for you. So, Robyn, since I've been here at Roots Tech, everyone seems to know your research on the Emory study. So, you've only done one study in your career, right? Can you tell us about the breakthrough that you had with that and the rest of your research?
Certainly. Thanks, Jody. And thank you all for being here. And for everybody at Roots Tech, this has just been an amazing experience. And we're both so honored to be here. So what's often called the Emory study or the dinner time study, we had been doing some work on family storytelling, but we really became interested in how do families spontaneously tell stories, like just an everyday daily interaction. We know that human beings communicate through telling stories. We're all storytellers. So we simply tape recorded dinner time in a bunch of middle-class families, and we transcribed them, and we looked at what kinds of stories they were telling. And what we found is stories emerge all the time in conversation, every few minutes. And when stories come up, they're told by the whole family. The whole family, parents, children, and extended members of the family get involved in the telling of those stories.
Which is so interesting because both of us have found when we've done research that families will say, we don't have any family stories. We're not storytelling families. But you found that being a storytelling family is important. Can you talk more about that surprising finding?
Sure. So in looking at the kinds of stories that are told around an everyday Tuesday spaghetti dinner, we found that there are different kinds of family stories, not surprising. A lot of the stories are what have been called today I stories. So you're coming together at the end of the day and you talk about what happened during the day. So Jody, what happened at work today? Or you ask, your child, how was the math test? So you're weaving your lives back together. Those are really critical stories for creating family cohesion.
Yeah.
But we were actually surprised at the number of stories that emerged just over an everyday dinner time conversation that harkened back generations. So families would tell stories not just about their own shared past. Oh, that's like when we went to the beach last summer. But the parents would say, yeah, that's like when I was a little girl. Or that's like crazy Uncle Joe, remember? And when those stories came up, the children were just as interested in hearing and participating in those stories. We also found, and this was really our most surprising finding, all the stories matter. The families who tell these stories do better. Jody's going to talk more about that in her own research. But what we found is that the families who told more of these intergenerational stories, that really predicted better outcome in the kids, in the adolescents. Higher self-esteem, higher academic competence, lower depression, lower anxiety.
Yeah.
So we really became interested in those intergenerational stories and how they really operate to build a sense of strength and resilience and identity in the younger generation.
So kids who knew their parents' stories tended to fare better than those who didn't in your research.
Exactly.
Yes. Okay, so from that, you and your colleague Marshall Duke from Emory developed a scale and set of questions called Do You Know?
The Do You Know scale, sometimes called the 20 questions.
Yeah, tell us about that.
And it's really a rough and ready index. It just a bunch of yes, no, 20 yes, no questions. Do you know where your parents met? Do you know where your grandmother grew up? And the adolescent, the young adult just says yes or no.
Yeah.
And it turns out that the more yeses predicts, again, all kinds of positive outcomes. Higher sense of identity, higher sense of autonomy, higher sense of family cohesion. But I think what's really important about that measure when we talk about it is for people to understand it's not knowing this fact or that fact. That's not what's important. What's important is that this is a marker.
Yeah.
If you know these facts about your family, it's because you've heard the stories, right? So it's the family storytelling that's important. It's the process of engaging in all of those stories.
Yeah.
And this is where I'm going to turn to you, Jody, because you know, we've certainly done some work on the process of telling those stories, but your work has really been critical in laying out these dimensions of how families tell stories.
Yeah, I love hearing about your research, and we've been doing research alongside each other over the years, and so it's really fun for us to be together. A couple important takeaways. So the studies that we've done with families have been in my research lab called Narrative Nebraska. We actually bring families in to tell stories together. And what we found are two really important things. One, how families frame stories matter and how families communicate stories matter. Because not all stories and not all storytelling are created equal. So what we found is that families who can frame their stories in positive, hopeful, resilient ways, even when they experience stress and the stories that they're telling are about stressful events, also tend to be higher on those markers of individual mental health and then also family satisfaction. And then near and dear to my heart as a communication researcher are these four dimensions that we found of how families verbally and non-verbally collaborate to tell stories together. So we found four behaviors that tend to distinguish families on measures of health and well-being, and they are engagement. So when families sit down to tell stories together, how warm and involved are they? Are they excited to be with one another? Or if they're supporting one another, are they reaching out, touching each other non-verbally? Are they involved? The second dimension is turn-taking. So do we build off of each other's stories? And do we give each other space to talk? So talk time. The most important of the dimensions we found in our research is communicated perspective taking. And I know that you found this too, that people who attend to ask for and then confirm each other's perspective, because let's face it, when we tell family stories, we've experienced the same thing, but often in very different ways. But if we say to each other, hey, how did you experience that? And oh, really? I didn't see it that way, but I can see where you would. That's a very important marker of health. And then finally, coherence. How do we organize the story? And do we do that in a way that showcases family level meaning making as opposed to individual level meaning making?
Yes, and as you say, perspective taking is really critical. Even in the intergenerational narratives, what we're finding, when adolescents and young adults tell the stories that they know about their parents growing up or their grandparents' experiences, the ones who are able to tell it from the perspective of the parent. My mother was so angry when her mother wouldn't let her go to that party.
Yeah.
You know, those are the kids who are doing the absolute best on all our measures.
Yeah.
So this ability to create bridges across ways of seeing the world is really critical.
Yeah, and it's important right now in our world that we all learn to engage in better perspective taking. It's the thing that can connect us as we tell stories and as we communicate with one another. So I love that we've both found that in our work.
So we know from our work over the past 20 years, and certainly all the work that everybody in this audience has been doing, that the collection and archiving and telling and retelling of family stories is important. Family stories that are told in very intentional ways, like the work you're doing, or in just the everyday spontaneous conversations that families have over the dinner table, in the car. These kinds of stories are important. So, Jody, what do we do with that? How do we help families?
Yeah. This is the thing that I'm most excited about in our research right now. So when I tell you that there are these 4 behaviors, engagement, turn-taking, perspective-taking, coherence, it's not like we can just easily stand up and teach these skills to families, but how we do that is through what researchers call intervention work. So we're doing what we call translational storytelling, applying the research that people like Robyn and others have done, and to building interventions, workshops, programming, tools to help families tell stories together and make sense of their family lives. So I'll just tell you about one intervention that I've been working on. It's called narrative connection, and it can be applied across multiple contexts. So it's one in which we've worked with families with cancer, parenting, women's retreats, mothering, grieving groups, but essentially we teach people to build trust through storytelling about family stories, and we also have them write stories, share those stories, and then we teach them compassionate witnessing, listening strategies. Because oftentimes what happens, for example, we ran a study with parents in COVID-19 who were really struggling with parenting. How many of you remember Zoom school or your kids running around while you were trying to work on Zoom during COVID? Anyone? It was hard. Parents were very stressed. So we ran groups of parents through this intervention called narrative parenting, an iteration of narrative connection. And what we found is when they were able to tell stories about parenting together and listen to each other's pain and difficulty by using these listening strategies, instead of not knowing what to say, which is what so many of us face, we could engage in storytelling and story listening that was really productive.
I think that's such important work to show that we really can help families become even better storytellers. But I think that you and I would agree that all families are storytellers. And often when we do these kinds of talks or workshops, families are always like, well, but what if I don't have stories? Or what if I have difficult or challenging stories? And I think it's important to underscore that it's just important to tell stories. We tell them all the time. Adolescents are listening. They're hearing them. We've done research with hundreds of adolescents. All of these kids know stories. They're hungry for these stories. And even when the stories are difficult, sometimes those are the most important stories to share. Because those are the stories, as you say, Jody, that build strength, that build resilience, that help us process deeply difficult things. So certainly we want the joyous stories. We want to share that joy, but we also want to share the tears.
And we need to make space to do that. And I think that that's the important thing about the intervention work, the applied work, is to create spaces in which people can tell their stories of difficulty, because one of the main functions of storytelling is connection and coping. And so to be able to do that and come together in community, our research has found that those parents in that study reported feeling so much less alone. That was one of the main benefits. They also had lower levels of anxiety, depression, higher levels of parenting self-confidence. And so we're going to take that into other realms. We're doing interventions with cancer patients and their families to give them an opportunity to make sense of this illness together as a family, but also to cope and grieve with one another, because life is so different. And so I think that's really important. My biggest dream is to create a center in which people can come together and retreat with one another, parents, families, so we can tell stories in community and make sense of things. Because one of the things that I've found is really important is the research shows that when parents' mental health is better, children's mental health is better. And also, until we know our own stories, we can't parent as effectively than if we did not. And so I think that work's really important.
And I would go beyond even that. Until we understand and know our own story, and until we process our own story, we can't really compassionately listen to others' stories. And in today's world, that's one of the things we must be able to do. We must be able to learn how to listen to other people's stories compassionately and with empathy.
Yes.
And I think that for both of us, that's the ultimate goal of our work.
Yeah.
To provide the empirical data for all of the work that you are doing to show how and why it matters that families who know their histories are families that are more coherent, healthier, both individually they show better mental health, and as families they show more strength and resilience.
Exactly.
So
we were talking about this yesterday, and we were thinking, what would the moral of our story be from all this collective research that we've done? And we decided we could agree on one thing.
stories connect
us.
people.
Thank you. Go up this way.
So much, Robyn and Jody. That was amazing. Did you know that today's really the first day that they've met in person? That's so cool. That's what family history and this connection does. We have the pleasure now of welcoming 3 organizations to the stage, each here to share their impactful initiatives. First up, we have Lindsay Fulton. She is the Director of Research at American Ancestors. Next, we'll be joined by Jesson Brackenbury, CEO from the Statue of Liberty and Ellis Island Foundation. Then, Jennifer Jacobs, CEO and co-founder of Connect Our Kids, will take our stage. So let's settle in and get prepared to be inspired. Our speakers have a wealth of knowledge and experience to share, and I have no doubt that today's discussions will leave a lasting impact. Please welcome the American Ancestors.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Lindsay Fulton. I am the Chief Research Officer at American Ancestors. Among other activities at the organization, I love participating in and leading education programs, both for adults and for children. Therefore, I was honored a few years ago when Dr. Henry Louis Gates Jr. asked me to work on a web series he produced called Finding Your Roots, The Seedlings. Inspired by his popular PBS series, Finding Your Roots with Henry Louis Gates Jr., and shot on the campus of Penn State University, Finding Your Roots, The Seedlings followed 13 young people in a genetics and genealogy camp as they explored their family history and DNA ancestry with techniques never before used in an education setting. The students spent a week together. They spent one day with me, where we discussed the ins and outs of family history research, and even tried to do some independent researching on their own families. One of the students, Jordan, had a particularly memorable experience. Before camp, he met with his family, and they started to fill out a family tree together. He took those notes with him as a starting point, and together, he and I did some searching.
It's challenging because you have to go through all these files just to find one person.
So, 10th of September 1925, Oscar Samuel.
And this is the father, Ernest Walker.
Yep. And then
Catherine Walker.
Yep. So formerly Angus. So this is her maiden name.
Okay.
So now we know when we're looking for a marriage record, we can look for a marriage record for Catherine. We now know who she's married to.
My dad's great-great-great-grandfather. And we just found the father's name and we had unknown for it. And now I can go ahead and actually change it now from unknown to the full name, and the name is Ernest Walker. This is the ancestor that I didn't really know who existed until now. I searched it up and found the result. It was like finding a big discovery. It was basically like finding the Titanic because you went so far back and you finally found a clue.
Now, thank you. Now, Jordan had a great result, and as you can see from the video, this was a really proud moment for him. Not just because he learned a name, but because he was able to participate in the process to actually find the name. Knowing stories about your family has an incredible and quantifiable impact on young people. But that positive impact doesn't come from the content of the answers. It's the process of learning those stories that results in the greatest personal growth. Therefore, doing genealogy holds untapped potential for students. Imagine the impact of making the power and promise of family history available to students in classrooms across the country. Based on the research from the Emory University study that Robyn just discussed, and my experience on the seedlings, American Ancestors has created a national family history curriculum for grades 4 through 8. It's important, however, to understand and acknowledge some of the challenges for students and educators when embarking on genealogical research. For many, the journey begins with what we call brick walls, those frustrating dead ends where information seems scarce or non-existent. Imagine the disappointment a student might feel when they hit these barriers, especially if they have limited knowledge of their family history to begin with. Furthermore, genealogy can unearth painful memories of family dynamics that students may not be prepared to confront. It's a deeply personal endeavor that can stir up complex emotions, from pride to discomfort and even distress. From an educator's standpoint, the challenges are equally daunting. Many teachers lack familiarity with genealogical research methods and may struggle to integrate into their curriculum effectively. Time constraints, especially in social studies classrooms, where genealogy is most likely to fit in, further compound the issue, leaving little room in an already packed schedule for exploring what are perceived to be niche subjects like family history. But despite these obstacles, there's reasons to be optimistic. As you just heard, research has shown that engaging in genealogy can yield significant psychological and emotional benefits for students. Delving into family history can boost self-esteem, resilience, and a sense of identity. Moreover, genealogy empowers students to actively participate in history, not just as passive learners, but as historians themselves. By investigating their roots, students develop critical thinking skills, learning to analyze sources and craft narratives that connect them to the past in meaningful ways. So how does our family history curriculum make genealogy accessible to all students? Well, we focus on 3 foundational strategies. First, we encourage students to start their research at home, just like we saw with Jordan. By tapping into their own family stories, photographs, and heirlooms, students can embark on a journey that feels familiar and manageable. This dinner table genealogy approach provides a gentle entry point into the research process, helping students build confidence and momentum. Second, we focus on developing research skills rather than fixating on specific family details. By emphasizing the process of inquiry, asking questions, evaluating sources, and drawing conclusions, we equip students with invaluable tools they can apply to any historical investigation, regardless of their personal background. Finally, we foster a supportive and inclusive learning environment where students feel safe to explore their family history at their own pace. Respect their boundaries and allow them to define what family means to them. By building trust and rapport with your students, you can navigate sensitive topics with compassion and with empathy. Since its launch over a year ago, our curriculum has garnered significant interest with 9,000 page views and 1,000 downloads by classroom teachers, home educators, librarians, genealogical societies, and genealogical societies across the country. The curriculum was adopted by the Maine State Department of Education, and next week we head to the US Virgin Islands, which recently passed a bill mandating US Virgin Island history be taught in the classroom, to provide a workshop for more than 30 educators. This exemplifies the growing demand for high-quality social studies curricula that help students develop critical research and thinking skills. So, if you are an educator, I encourage you to visit our website, to download the family history curriculum. We are also happy to offer K through 12 schools free access to American Ancestors. There is a form to complete on the page if you are a classroom teacher, administrator, or school librarian. And if you have young family historians in your life, please encourage them to participate in our American Ancestors Young Family Historians Essay Contest, which is open for students enrolled in grades 4 through 12 in public, private, parochial, and home schools across the nation and US territories. This year's contest invites students to share a story from their personal family history and to explain how lessons from that story can apply to their life today. Genealogy has the power to unlock a treasure trove of learning opportunities for students of all backgrounds. By overcoming the challenges and embracing the potential of this rich field of study, we can empower students to connect with their past, understand their present, and shape their future. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Jesse Brackenbury. I am the president and CEO of the Statue of Liberty Ellis Island Foundation. And our nonprofit got its start 40 years ago when President Ronald Reagan asked Chrysler CEO Lee Iacocca to lead the private sector effort to restore the statue and Ellis Island in time for their centennial. The American people stepped forward, and our foundation led the effort in partnership with the National Park Service to do that restoration. You see the scaffolding for the Statue of Liberty, and we restored it. We replaced the original torch with one that matched Laboulaye's original design, gilded in gold, and threw a big party. The President of the United States came, the President of France came. We broadcast this worldwide for Lady Liberty's 100th birthday. We also worked on restoring Ellis Island. Ellis Island, as you probably all know, is the country's first federal immigration station. And from 1892 to 1954, 12 million immigrants were welcomed to our shores. This is a picture of the Great Hall, not looking so great. After Ellis Island closed in 1954, the federal government tried to sell it as surplus property. Thankfully, that didn't happen. But for the next 30 years, it deteriorated until it looked like this. Through the restoration, we brought the Great Hall back to being great. This is the historic registry room where everyone was processed. And when we opened this museum in 1990, since then, more than 50 million people have visited the museum. We also, at the same time, constructed the American Immigrant Wall of Honor, where in one of the only places in a national park or monument you can recognize a family member. We're coming up on 1 million people who have inscribed an immigrant's name or a family member's name on this wall to honor them. Our next project was done in partnership with Family Search. And so in 2001, we opened in the Ellis Island Museum the American Family Immigration History Center. And this project helped spark interest in genealogy worldwide. With Family Search's help, we scanned all of the Ellis Island arrival records. And as you have been hearing about, and as you know well yourselves, that process of finding a family member is so powerful. It is particularly powerful after you have walked through the halls of Ellis Island and walked in the footsteps of an ancestor, with those walls vibrating with history. And then you sit down and you have the chance to find the person who came before, who walked those same places, whose ferry docked in the same place that your ferry just did. We have continued to celebrate family heritage with our awards. Here are a few of the awardees. That's Gloria and Emilio Estefan, Oprah, Diane von Furstenberg, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and many others. Our work with the National Park Service has continued. In the aftermath of two tragedies in New York that closed the islands, 9/11 and the damage from Hurricane Sandy, we assisted in getting the islands back open to the public. And our most recent project was the construction of a brand new museum on Liberty Island. This museum houses the original torch that was replaced in that 80s restoration. It has an incredible immersive theater with a film we partnered with Disney on to tell the story of Lady Liberty, both her history and the symbolism and meaning today. And it has these spectacular views out over the Manhattan skyline and to the Statue of Liberty. The museum and the audio tour are all free with your ferry ticket. This opened in just 2019, so if you haven't been, I consider this a personal invitation to come. It's an incredible experience. This 40 years of history has our foundation's partnership with the National Park Service as one of the country's most successful public-private partnership, and our partnership with Family Search as a long, terrific partnership that also has worked so well. So let me give you a little taste of what we are up to next. So, from the focus on Liberty Island back to Ellis Island, we are planning now for the biggest project on Ellis Island since the original restoration. So this museum is one of the most important in the country. Partly that is, it's one of the most visited museums in the whole country. We get several million visitors each year. It's also important because it tells a story of who we are, because it talks about where we came from. And so this museum, which was groundbreaking when it opened more than 30 years ago, now feels as powerful as it is in places like a 30-year-old museum. And so we are embarking on an effort to reimagine that museum to capture today's visitors. And so there are places where instead of text on the walls, we will be able to add film and interactives and so on to change the experience and capture particularly a younger generation and engage them in this storytelling. One of the particular elements, and this is a deepening of our partnership with Family Search, is that Ellis Island database that we created almost 25 years ago. We are expanding that so that it will be not just arrival records for the Port of New York, but all arrival records that have been digitized, so that that powerful experience can now be not just for some of our visitors, but for all Americans. Incredibly, 40%, thank you. 40% of Americans can trace an ancestor to someone who came through Ellis Island, which is pretty incredible. It also means that 60% can't. And so for all of those visitors, we want to have a museum that they can find themselves in and a database that they can find their families in, both free online and available within that powerful historic main immigration building. We will be talking much more about this project in the months to come. And so if you are interested in learning more about the work of the foundation and our public-private partnership, if you're interested in that American Immigration Wall of Honor, please follow us here. And thank you so much.
Good morning. I'm Dr. Jennifer Jacobs, CEO and co-founder of Connect Our Kids. I'm an Army veteran, a nuclear engineer, and a physicist by training. I've spent most of my career working to counter nuclear terrorism. But 13 years ago, I read a Time magazine article about foster care, and I noticed a similarity in what foster care professionals needed to do to find families for the kids in their care, and what intelligence analysts do to find and track terrorist networks. It turned out, though, that while the national security space has multi-million-dollar infrastructure with advanced data search and management software, the foster care space has Post-it notes and Microsoft Excel. Youth who age out of care without any family face a difficult future. By age 26, over 80% have been incarcerated, homeless, victimized, or they are dead. So the status quo is not acceptable. This led me to co-found Connect Our Kids 7 years ago. Our tools were inspired by that national security software, but are designed by and for child welfare professionals to help keep kids connected to their people. Our tools are an interactive hub to help social workers uncover the family and connections a child already has. Sadly, the processes and procedures in child welfare are often set up to separate families, rather than to help bring them together in times of difficulty. Sometimes the agencies responsible for helping families stay together are actually called the division of children and families. Our relationships matter. The Harvard study of adult development reached the perhaps surprising conclusion that our relationships have as powerful an impact on our health as any physical factor like exercise or cholesterol levels. Dr. Robert Waldinger, the study's director, said, "Loneliness kills. It's as powerful as smoking or alcoholism." I'd like you to take a moment to think about your relationships. Visualize the 5 most important people in your life right now. Maybe your partner, your kids, your parents, friends, or siblings. What would you give up if you had to keep them? If they disappeared from your life today, how long would you grieve? Could I make you whole by providing someone else to fill that role? Of course not. But this is how we often treat children in foster care, as if the important relationships in their lives can be easily replaced with other relationships. Children's relationships matter to them just as much as ours matter to us. Even more so, in that children's developing brain architecture actually depends on the establishment and continuity of crucial relationships. The impact of family and community relationships for a child is central to their identity, their future, and their understanding of why they matter. Dr. Robyn Fivush's work on the connection between family stories and adolescent resilience and identity is particularly poignant for children experiencing foster care. An understanding of one's ancestry can be an important part of this. Star, a teenager in Kentucky, is a good example of this. Star finally had a stable, caring foster home, but her parents' challenges left a void where her story should have been. Her social worker used Connect Our Kids tools to locate Star's paternal grandmother. From her, Star was surprised and pleased to learn that she had been named for a great-grandmother who had been so determined to seek a better life for herself and her children that she immigrated from England to the United States as a young woman. Star's foster parents recognized how important it was for her to know her own people and their stories, so they drove her to meet her grandmother and begin building a relationship with her. If knowing their family's stories can help children weather difficult times, then foster children need those stories perhaps more than anyone. Another good example comes from Ohio. Daniel had deeply committed foster parents who wanted to adopt him. But Daniel refused the adoption because he felt he wasn't worth adopting. He considered his parents failures. Addictions and prison had meant that they hadn't been able to care for him. If his parents were failures, well, He must be one too. Daniel's social worker decided to broaden his view of his family and hoped it might help him shift his story. She used Connect Our Kids tools to get enough information to then use Ancestry.com, and she built out a family tree. When she showed him his tree, filled with lots of regular people, as well as a great-grandfather who had been a well-loved small-town pastor, and a great-grandmother who had been a nurse in World War II, Daniel was stunned. "Wait, what?" he said. "There are good people in my family?" Daniel also got to meet other living relatives, including his grandmother, who he now sees regularly. His social worker told us that he's different now. He stands straighter, smiles more, and he's become open to being adopted by his foster family because he knows better who he is. Research shows that foster children placed with supportive family do better than those who live with strangers. They experience less trauma, have fewer behavioral challenges, and are more likely to graduate from high school. Dr. Jody Keller-Koenig's work tells us that family stories not only build resilience, but that developing a complete narrative are actually important healing medicine for processing past or perhaps ongoing trauma. Who, what, when, and why did this happen to our family, and what is my role in it, the child wonders. Busy social workers often think that it's better or easier to keep details from a child, when in fact, research shows that the child desperately needs enough information to make some sense of what has happened. With kin, they have this opportunity to build fuller narratives, and through these to process the emotional trauma they are experiencing. If they can't be placed with family, their family relationships and narrative building must still be supported, just like Star's foster parents and Daniel's social worker did. So hundreds of thousands of children's futures depend on social workers' ability to connect them with their people and surround them with community. But we're asking overwhelmed social workers to do this job without the tools they need, like sewing without a needle. It's really hard. In genealogy, Family Search is a great example of the connectivity tools to do genealogical work effectively and efficiently. Similarly, Ancestry.com, MyHeritage, and others. In child welfare, Connect Our Kids builds the tools that can keep kids connected. Because this work overlaps significantly with genealogy, tools like Family Search are integrated right into our own tools. Our family mapping tool helps visually find and show a child's connections and ancestry, allowing social workers to focus their time on engaging with the family. Connection stories happen more often than you'd think in foster care. We hear them over and over when we talk with our users. And your contributions to shared family trees can be critical in building the infrastructure needed to help foster children, to find connection to their people, their identity, and their history. If this work speaks to you, we would love for you to join our outreach effort on social media or to reach out to us for a further conversation. The impact of your work in genealogy might just be much greater than you think. Thank you.
Jennifer, thank you. That was beautiful.
Thank you.
We've learned so much, so amazing. It's amazing to see the impact that this family history has had on so many people. We would like to, we have a QR code. We're going to now open it up to a questions from the audience. So we're going to get a slide up that you can, there it is, right there. You can click that. And now what I would like is you are submitting your questions, so you click that, and then you can put in a question. As you submit your questions, I'd like to invite Doctors Fivush and Kellis back to the stage. Come on out. Give them a round of applause as they're coming out.
Thanks.
Look at this.
We're back.
Yes, you are. And you even have notes.
I do.
You were back there taking so many notes.
Exactly.
So before I ask questions from the audience, what did you think about the presentations, what you just saw?
I thought they were incredible. I mean, my heart is in translational storytelling, and these individuals, Lindsay, Jesse, and Jennifer, they're all putting it into practice in the most meaningful ways for people who really need it. So I was inspired.
Yes.
Of course, that, but also bringing up such critically important factors in how we think about family history. The importance of place and space, the importance of names. We were talking about this over dinner last night. Where does your name come from?
Yeah.
And just having that knowledge. So small things that we don't often think of because we're always in space, we're always in a place. When we think about the family home or coming through, walking in the footsteps of, and people who don't have the privilege of having that information.
Yeah. And I love that sometimes we think it needs to be a big thing, but it can be something as small as a name, like we saw in one of those videos.
Yes.
Something as small as a name makes someone know that they matter and they're important. All right, I'm starting to get some questions.
Great.
It says, your research really resonated with this industry. Does it surprise you to hear the impact that you've had?
I'll let you take that one.
Yes. You know, as academics, we live in a very different world most of the time. And we've both been fortunate in that we're both interested in, and people have been interested in our research. And we've done workshops, and I've worked with parent groups and grandparent groups. Jody, of course, has done the narrative intervention work around narrative connections. I was not prepared for the size and positive intensity of Roots Tech, and also that everybody calls it the Emory study. I love that.
Yeah, that's amazing. Have you been surprised?
Yes, I mean, well, I think what I wanted to say at the beginning, and I forgot to say, is it's almost like being with your people, right? The number of people that have talked about family storytelling since we've been here. I mean, we work in our little academic corners, and we're the sole people who are doing research in family storytelling. And really, the two of us are among few people in the field doing this work, and our graduate students. And so to hear everyone focus so much on the things that are important to us and that we love is kind of amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
All right, next question. Are written family stories as effective as oral storytelling?
Oh, that's a great question. So we've had, go ahead.
No, do you want to start?
Yeah. We've had people write their family stories, and we've had them tell their family stories. We were talking about this at another dinner or lunch the other day about how powerful it is to engage in storytelling in person. And so there's something about the process of telling stories together, particularly because when they are family stories, you can really build on one another in ways that are really meaningful and important to creating family identity. And so I would say that, of course, I'm biased, I'm a communication researcher. I think written stories matter, certainly, and some of the companies here that do that, like Storyworth, I think is this incredible, you know, you can write and learn your family's stories, and I think that that is incredibly important. And to create shared meaning, there is something very important about doing that in person.
I don't want to take anything away from written family stories. Sometimes they are all we have, and they are unbelievably meaningful, the letters, the diaries, the stories. But when you sit with somebody and hear the story, the idiom is from their lips. It's different. And we're struggling with this now in some work that I'm doing with ANU, which is the Museum of the Jewish People in Tel Aviv, around Holocaust survivors. Because there are now about 250,000 survivors of the Holocaust still living. They're quite old. We will be losing that living history. There are archives, there are videos, but the grandchildren, maybe the great-grandchildren, will be the last generation to hear the stories from their lips. And how do we preserve that? How do we accept that honor and obligation and privilege to carry somebody's stories. And it relates, I think, a little bit, Jody, to your work on compassionate witnessing.
Yeah.
There are different ways to hear stories, and I think we hear them differently
We do.
when we're sitting and talking.
Yes.
Yeah. And we have to learn how to not only tell stories, but how to listen to stories. I think that that's such an important part of it.
Yes.
Because part of the way that we feel affirmed and a sense of belonging, which we knew was one of the most important things to our own mental health, is to be listened to in a way that is compassionate.
And I feel like that makes the story that you're sharing
Yeah.
even realize that it is important when
Yeah.
someone is genuinely listening to what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I love hearing the person's voice as well.
Yes.
How can I make family history and storytelling more fun for my kids?
Okay, I'll take that one. First thing I want to do is, I get this question all the time, and I have to reassure families, you don't think your adolescents want to talk about this. They roll their eyes, they go, oh, come on, not yet. But in fact, we've now interviewed hundreds, if not thousands of adolescents. And we ask them, tell us stories you know about your parents, when your parents were growing up, your grandparents. We ask them for stories, positive stories, difficult stories, stories about things that your parent might regret. Over 95% of these adolescents and young people can tell you a story, and they are happy, they want to tell you these stories. If anything, what we hear is, I wish I knew more stories.
Yes.
So you think they're not listening, but they are. On the other hand, I also think you can do things, you can have like a family story night.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How would it be? I think it is so fun hearing a story and hearing your grandparents tell you a story. How do you make the searching for family history? How do you make that part fun?
I think that's a really good question. I really loved in one of the presentations the idea of, looking through pictures together, right? So like gathering the photo album, which because our pictures are all on our phones now, we rarely do. So I really loved that idea of pulling that out and then learning things about the family. I will tell you that I have teenagers who act like they don't care and are not listening and don't want to hear my stories. But when I learned of Robyn's 20 questions, I made it sort of a competition.
Yeah.
Like I was like, do you know these? And how many do you know? And so we actually did sit down at the table to use some of those. So I think there's ways to make it fun. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It is. And it's sitting down and hearing your story. Yeah. I love hearing how my parents met. And I know my kids, even though they roll their eyes and, oh, gross, they love hearing about those moments.
Yeah. The other thing I would say is stories don't always emerge fully blown in a single moment.
Right.
They'll emerge over time. Maybe you start to tell a story to your child and they roll their eyes and you go, okay, not the right time. But maybe a few days later or a few weeks later, something else is happening. And it matches something that's going on in their lives. And suddenly they're more open to that story.
Yeah.
So I also think that there has to be a sense of, this is important, you have to sit down and I'm going to tell you these stories and you must listen.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's not how we communicate as human beings.
It's the casual
exactly.
conversation.
The
And
stories
in the car.
emerge as needed.
In the car,
The car is one of the best places so that you don't have to be face to face.
Yes.
Stories emerge. But I think, too, we can ritualize storytelling more than we do.
Ooh, talk about that. What do you mean?
So this is not based on my research. This is based on my experience as a parent. But I tell my kids the story of their birth every birthday. And the story evolves over time. And I could see it when my oldest was little. They anticipated what was coming.
Like the parts.
Like, and then added to it. But I think from a family history perspective, if you ritualize it and you do that every year, then you could bring up other stories like, oh, well, do you know where your grandma was born? And you can talk about those kinds of stories by pulling them together.
I love that, ritualizing it. What a great idea. You guys are good at this.
Well, thanks. That's why they pay us the big bucks.
We've got one more question. You mentioned processing our own story and that it must be done as a parent before we can help others process their stories. Can you expound on that? How does one process their own story?
I mean, I would say one of the best books that talks about this is Dan Siegel's Parenting from the Inside Out. So I think where you process the story is in therapy, in conversation with other people, in journaling. I think it's really important that we figure out what are the difficulties that we had in our families of origin and what we're bringing with us to the current family, and how can we process that before we bring that trauma or baggage into our parenting. Do you want to add anything?
I also think this resonates with themes that we've already talked about, like why is it important to hear the story from somebody's own lips?
Yeah.
Stories are social. It's not just my story, it's our story.
Right.
And when I'm sharing my story with you, you're listening and you're adding bits of your story, and we're constructing a story together.
Yeah.
That's processing.
Yes.
So when I'm telling you my story and you say, oh, that happened to me once and blah, blah, and then, but I did this to help myself or to solve it.
Right.
You've now given me tools
Yeah.
to understand my story differently. So yes, certainly in more formal settings like therapy, but I think this is what families do together.
Yeah.
They process it together.
Well, and
they make sense out of
Yeah.
it together.
And that's part of why we're doing the interventions that we do. Sometimes we need to tell stories with other parents, not with our kids.
Yes.
Just in building community with each other and understanding and feeling less alone by hearing each other's stories. I'm not perfect, you're not perfect. We hear that when we hear other people's stories of struggle.
Isn't that amazing? That's how we are created as human beings. When we're in community, that's how we can solve so many problems.
Exactly.
I have one more question that I'd like to ask.
I want to say one thing. We have been telling stories even before we had language.
Yeah.
Right.
So we've been telling stories for millions
We're
of
storytelling
years.
creatures.
Yeah.
That is who we are. We can't not tell stories.
Where do you see the future of this research going?
I mean, for me, the future of the research is us as researchers applying what we know from the science to workshops and programming with people who can benefit from connecting through storytelling. That's where I think it is. And one of my passion projects is working with parents whose kids struggle with their mental health. We're in a mental health crisis. And so I think, and some of the presenters before us talked about the mental health problems that kids are facing. I think we need to help families through that crisis by allowing them to make sense of and connect through storytelling.
Wonderful. Amen. You got an amen out there.
I could not say that any better.
You're amening it as well.
Amen.
All right. Thank you both for being here
Thank
today.
you.
This has been wonderful. Let's give them
Thank
another
you
round of applause.
all.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hugger?
We're huggers.
Yeah, huggers. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, friends, before we wrap up, take a quick pulse check. That's like this, 2 fingers on your neck. Did you enjoy the Impact Forum today? Yes. It's amazing. We're going to move on now. I love the energy that's here today. We're going to take that enthusiasm, and I know that we're going to go into the next section, our general session. In 30 minutes, we're going to bring this energy, the knowledge that we have, the people that just came in. Let's not keep it secret what we learned here just now in this past hour. Let's share it with everybody. That's what we do. We just learned that today. We're better as a community. We're better when we share our stories. So the knowledge that you learned here at Roots Tech, take that in your life and share it with people coming in that sit next to you. Put your arm around them and say, hey, cuz, can't believe we got to tell stories together. So we'll see you in 30 minutes. Thank you guys so much.